This video will take a look at factoring. Previously we looked at how we could take two binomials and multiply them together to get a quadratic. Taking g plus 5 times g plus 2, we can apply FOIL to get a quadratic. This quadratic is g squared plus 7g plus 10. Now what we want to do is figure out how do we go from the quadratic back to the two binomials. We do this by something called factoring. Now you've done factoring before, primarily with just numbers. The number 24 can be factored. It can be factored into two numbers that multiply together to equal the 24, such as 3 and 8. 3 and 8 are factors because 3 times 8 equals 24. G plus 5 and g plus 2 are factors because these two things can multiply together to get g squared plus 7g plus 10. So our two binomials are considered the factors. Well, how do we get back to the binomials? First, we must look at what it is that got us from the binomials to the quadratic. When going from the binomials to the quadratic, we used FOIL. We did first, which meant our first two terms from each parentheses went to make our g squared. We did the outside, then the inside, and then the last. So our last numbers that don't have variables attached, 5 and 2, created our last here on our quadratic. So if you take a look, our first terms multiplied together to equal our first term here, our last terms for our last term here. Now let's take a look at the factors of 10. So 1 and 10. But this also has 2 and 5. Now as you notice, the factors of 10 happen to be the same numbers that are showing up in our parentheses. And that's because the last numbers in the parentheses, the L and FOIL, multiply to give us our last term in our quadratic. So we need to start by looking at the factors of our last term. From there, we have two sets of factors, 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. Which one of them, when added together, will equal our middle term? Remember that we had to combine like terms. So in this case, if we used FOIL, we would end up with 5g plus 2g, which combined to get 7g. So our factors that work here are 2 and 5. Now let's look at the quadratic given to us in green. Again, to figure out how to get it back to the parentheses or to factor it, we need to take a look at the last term. The last term here is 20. What are the factors of 20? Well, we have 1 in itself always, 1 and 20. We have 2 and 10. We have 4 and 5. There are three sets of factors. One of these sets of factors will work to put it back in the parentheses. And in order to decide which one of those will work, we have to see which ones, when we add them, will equal our middle term. 1 plus 20 equals 21. So that makes these our factors. Once we get them, let's write our parentheses. And since our last term is what we're looking to fill, we're going to put this 1 and the 20 as our last term. In this case, they're both positive, so I'm going to put plus 1, and I'm going to put plus 20. Now what goes first? Look back at our gray example. Our first terms create our first term, a g and a g. So how do we get that? Well, looking at this, we have our v squared, so we're going to put a v and a v. Here are our binomials that factor out of v squared plus 21v plus 20. Now let's factor this quadratic, a squared plus 13a plus 30. We will begin by factoring our 30. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, and that's all of them. So taking a look here, we need to find the pair that adds up to equal 13. Well, 1 plus 30 equals 31. So that's not it. 2 plus 15 equals 18. Not it. 3 plus 10 equals 13. This is what we're looking for. So we will make our parentheses. we're going to add our positive 3. We're going to add our positive 10. And then we'll go and see what letter or term creates our first term in our quadratic. That's an A. So we need to have our first terms be an A and an A. So when I FOIL them, A times A will give me A squared. The nice thing about factoring is because you know how to use FOIL, you can always check your work. So now I'm going to go back and FOIL and make sure I get my answer from the beginning. So first, A times A squared. Outside, A times 10, 10A. Inside, 3 times A, 3A. Last, 3 times 10, 30. Combine like terms, A squared plus 13A plus 30. Therefore, our factors are correct.